Hi, I am Devin from Career Fed. Welcome back to Talking Careers with Young Adults. My aim with this series is to give parents and guardians a wider context to use when trying to help their young adult kids figure out their next steps when it comes to career and education planning. So far, we've covered the basics of career development. We've talked a bit about your own mindset and your own language about your career path, and we've covered some highlights on post-secondary pathways. So if you have not yet watched those videos, I do recommend you go back and do that. And if you have, then I'm going to minimize my screen so you don't get to see this gorgeous face. Sorry, but you can focus on the slide content and we'll dive right into chapter 4. Okay, so this series is going to cover 5 main topics. So as I said, we have already looked at the first 3. Our last one was a bit of a primer on post-secondary pathways, particularly apprenticeship, college, and university. The topic in this video is going to cover the economy in Canada and some of the trends and how things have changed over the last couple of decades, not including the COVID-19 pandemic. That'll be the topic of our last video in the series. So take a moment and think back to when you first entered the workforce. And if you don't work outside the home, then think a little bit about your peers at the time, or family members, or your spouse, somebody that did enter the workforce around the time um, that you were kind of at that age. And I want you to consider a few questions. How did people dress in the workplace? What was happening in areas like politics and entertainment at the time? What sort of technology was in use in the workplace? What topics were okay to talk about at work and not okay to talk about? And maybe along with that, what kind of language was acceptable in the workplace and what wasn't? And what was the average age of people that you worked with, or as I mentioned earlier, your peers worked with? If you will find it helpful, then I would recommend that you pause the video here and maybe jot down a few notes around those things and continue on when you're ready. To start, a quick overview of the generations that your kids are in. Now, I designed this series to be for parents and guardians with kids under the age of 30, sort of like 15 to 30 age range. And so that would put them either in Generation Z or the Millennials. The year ranges between the two generations are kind of all over the map. It really depends on the particular source that you pull from. I pulled these from the Pew Research Center, a document they produced in 2019. I won't read the slide point by point, but I do want to highlight a couple of themes. One is your kids are likely not content to work at a boring, mindless job just to collect a good paycheck. These are groups of people that want their work to be challenging, they want it to be inspiring, and they want to work for organizations and for leaders who want to change the world. The other theme I want to highlight here is technology. Technology is a major part of life for a millennial or a Gen Z, and the rest of us kind of had to get on board. Older millennials were largely responsible for creating social media, but it's the younger millennials and the Gen Zs that have kind of shaped what that looks like and how it moves in our society. And those are the people who are definitely influenced by what they see and what they engage with through various social media platforms. These two generations are much, much more likely to change careers throughout their lifetime than the baby boomers, 3 times more likely, in fact. And thanks to technology, they often don't have to wait to make that change. So let me give you an example. Let's take a 26-year-old university grad who has completed a program in communications. At her day job, she's an account manager with a public relations firm. But outside of regular hours, she creates custom metal art using, various welding techniques or whatever, and sells her products on Etsy. Or perhaps she provides web design or copy editing services through a site like Fiverr. As she's promoting her side gig through her social media channels to friends, more and more strangers start to follow her and go, wow, this person's stuff is really, really cool. And this setup increases her income and maybe feeds a bit more of a creative side of her than maybe she's not getting in her regular workplace. Eventually, it may be that the side gig is more lucrative, more interesting, and more fun than the day job. And so she quits the day job to focus on the better paying and more fun option. Very common. In the last census, Stats Canada reported that the average tenure of an employee at any workplace in Canada is about 8.5 years. There's variation, of course, in age. We've already talked about that, but there's also variation depending on the industry. The longest is agriculture. No shock there. Agriculture tends to be, family-based business, something that passes down through generations. And hospitality, much of hospitality is very seasonal, so it makes sense that would have the shortest tenure. Add to this that employers can cast their nets quite wide when it comes to hiring. There are any number of websites they can post jobs to, and they can get dozens of qualified candidates right now, rather than waiting for, say, 5 years for maybe a new graduate hire that they've just brought on board to be ready for promotion. They can go out and get the person they need right now. And if it's likely on top of that, when you look back to the previous couple of points there, that their Gen Z or their millennial that they've hired is not going to be around in 5 years, then they have even less incentive to, work on promoting that person, developing that person, providing them with additional supports or mentoring or anything like that in order to get them ready for that promotion. So they're actually better off bringing in someone external that maybe they could promote in a year or two. This will work both ways for your kids. If they're the new grad hire, they need to be aware of the fact that probably somebody external can and will be hired over them in terms of when they're ready for promotion, unless they do some serious hustling. And on the other side of it, it means that if they aren't being mentored, stimulated, challenged in their workplace, there are opportunities for them to jump and be pulled in somewhere else. What all this comes down to, what it is contingent on, is the idea that your kids as employees are going to be much more responsible for their own professional development than you were when you started in the workplace. They will have to seek out extra credentials. They will need to take weekend workshops and online courses to stay competitive in the workplace. And so whatever they've done in terms of post-secondary education so far, or whatever they're considering for a next step, it is highly unlikely that that one program will be the last thing that they ever do. And that is a huge reality that's really important for them to face, but for you to recognize as well. So they may go get that degree, they may go get the master's and do whatever, but that doesn't mean they're going to stop education. Lifelong learning is going to be a part of staying competitive in the workplace, pretty much no matter what field they choose. And that is something to be prepared for. That brings us to the end of this 4th chapter of the video series. I will see you in the next video, where we will take a look at the impacts of COVID-19, at least in the short term, and how your kids can be preparing to sort of work around that. You take good care.